Okay, so this set of slides that we are looking at is vitiating factors, focusing especially on undue influence. Now, to understand the background of it, you have to appreciate that in any contract, circumstances occur before the contract is made and at the time the contract is made. So these circumstances can, at the end of the day, become a vitiating factor. The reason they are considered a vitiating factor is because it affects the freedom of contract. So when we consider freedom of contract, we are looking at a person's willingness, voluntariness to accept all terms and conditions of the contract. And this is where, if a term or the contract itself works in a way that is unfair to the claimant who is raising the issue of vitiating factor, it may either make the contract void or voidable. So the difference between void and voidable is that void means the contract entered into on the ground of mistake or illegal contracts, and voidable usually applies to contracts entered into on the ground of misrepresentation, fraud, coercion, and undue influence. So when we say a contract is void, when we say the contract is void, it means we take the contract as non-existent between the parties. Okay, that means the court treats the contract as not existing at all. So the remedy available is to basically reverse the transaction between them. But when you say the contract is voidable, the innocent party has a choice. They either have a choice to affirm or void the contract. So voidable means you have a choice. If you want to go ahead with the contract, you can. Now, two critical issues arise when a contract is said to be vitiated. First, the contract entered into is one which is not lawful in the eyes of law. So there are some vitiating factors that would make the contract unlawful. Or the contract entered into is one which is not voluntary. That means there's no consent, there's no voluntariness, there's no freedom of choice. So in either one circumstance, it would vitiate the contract. Now, the need for the contract to be lawful as well as consensual, you can see this requirement in Section 10 in the Malaysian Contracts Act. Take note that Section 10 says all agreements are contracts if they are made by free consent and for lawful consideration. Yeah. If they are not, then they are supposed to be declared void. Now, Section 10 should be read together with 2H. So 2H says that an agreement is not a contract. It is enforceability of an agreement that makes it a contract. And there may be issues or circumstances that make the agreement not enforceable. And free consent can affect enforceability of contracts. So these are the things that we get when we read Section 10 with Section 2H. So when would an agreement be affected by a vitiating factor? Well, that is where we look at Section 14. So 14 gives us the circumstances recognized by law which would vitiate a contract. So consent is said to be so caused when it would not have been given but for the existence of coercion. So if consent is given due to coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrep, or mistake, then we have a vitiating factor that has a consequence on the enforceability of the contract. So the effect of section 14 here is that it gives value to consent and voluntariness. So this we can see. And consent we can also see is tied very closely to freedom of contract. But not all forms of consent vitiates a contract or the enforceability of contract. So for example, if you go to work, pressure to get a job, to meet personal commitments, this would not vitiate the employment contract. You can't go out there and say, oh, I want to, avoid my employment contract because I was forced to find employment because I wanted to buy that iPhone. So that would not work because those are acceptable pressures. So it would not vitiate. So a lot of times when you look at fraud, you look at misrep, you look at undue influence, you look at coercion, you look at mistake, especially when you look at coercion and undue influence, it must be more than ordinary pressure. It must be a pressure that is either unlawful or it is a pressure that is morally unacceptable in the circumstances.